Thank you very much. Thank you for this very friendly welcome, and thank you for this very kind invitation to this very conference. I'm going to talk to you about the trends in Islamism and especially the role of the Documentation Center, an institution that has been established in Austria about 5 years ago. So, pardon me for the typo up there, but what are some of the key trends that the Documentation Center currently sees? I'm going to quickly talk to you about the gray zone, virtual worlds, and the networks, and what role does the Documentation Center play in the present development. What is our mandate and structure, activities, research and cooperations, and the current role. When we look at Islamism, by now it has become clear to us that we're dealing with a transnational phenomenon with geopolitical significance. Islamism has become an instrument of political power. I'm pretty sure this is not going to be news to most of you, but many groups like the Muslim Brotherhood we've talked about, Turkish organizations and so forth, have become part of the geopolitical power play, being supported in Austria, in Europe, in order to use them as a political bargaining chip as well. This goes in line with hybrid strategies. We see NGOs being established, associations being established, shops, companies, online campaigns, etc. Especially against us, the Documentation Center, and through different campaigns that appear to be grassroots campaigns and grassroots movements. For example, after the Operation Luxor, where Muslim Brotherhood entities or suspected entities were raided in Austria, we were drawn into the debate, mainly due to the name, Documentation Center Political Islam. We had nothing to do with this police raid, yet were targeted by various campaigns, orchestrated by I would say organizations and alleged affiliates of the Muslim Brotherhood. What does this lead to? Societal polarization as a strategic goal, the strengthening of parallel structures, and impact on other forms of extremism. We've heard this already, that left-wing extremism has become a form of extremism we talk about again. To be 100% honest with you here, a couple of years ago, I would have thought left-wing extremism is not really that up-to-date. You know, it's not really that existent. There may be the one or other little enclave somewhere, the one or other radical, but it's not necessarily one of the main priorities. Well, don't I look foolish now? I mean, it's become a completely, it developed completely new dynamics and deepens the societal divides. And I want to take you back about 10 years ago to 2015, when ISIS published a strategy that was called the elimination of the gray zone. I'm not sure if many of you are familiar with this strategy, but the stated goal was to destroy the spaces of coexistence between Muslims and non-Muslims. The method was terrorist attacks. So in this regard, you know, it's hard to compare them with Islamists, but I'm gonna go there anyways. They were trying to provoke a backlash, anti-Muslim hate and repression, to make Muslims feel excluded. And the outcome would be that the Muslim community would be facing a binary choice, which is either support ISIS or be considered a traitor or an apostate, which would make you a legitimate target. I dare to compare it to the Islamists that, by, I'd say, many standards, do not adhere to violence, do not advocate violence, at least the ones we have in Austria. They have moved this strategy, this idea, to social media. Especially the Hamas attack, the 7th of October, has been a turning point for Islamist mobilization. The pro-Palestinian protests, we've heard about them many times over here as well in this particular setting, but also very popular online preachers and influencers. They changed their strategy recently, by the way, especially the German ones. I'm not sure if you followed that, the Muslim Interactive, Generation Islam and Reality Islam, Realität Islam. They've all moved away from this sort of unifying branding that they have. They're focusing now on accounts and channels affiliated with their names. We've actually published on that as well just recently, because we found it to be a very interesting development in how they distribute their narratives. We're observing lifestyle Islamists with a broad reach. That's something we see in the streets, on our everyday walks through the city. But I'm sure you've also realized that there is many more shops where you buy hijabs, you buy certain merchandise, you buy pullovers with logos and affiliated slogans, etc. And all basically relating to the narrative that we've heard about today already of victimhood, anti-Westernism, anti-Semitism. We're linking local conflicts with global narratives. Israel-Palestine is a very relevant case in this particular for this particular point, but also the developments in Syria. Really, I mean, like it's new geopolitical blocks and spheres of influence. So Islamism has become a geopolitical instrument, especially when we're looking towards Russia, Qatar, Turkey, etc. I think this is where one of the bigger problems lies. Really, is that we are very occupied with what's going on in mosques, and we do that. We look into into the Friday sermons. We try to understand what's going on in the community, but that there is a much bigger game, a much bigger strategy at play here. That those organizations and groups are actually also used, and we're basically handing over the steering wheel to autocratic governments with at times rather sinister strategies to influence our national security and what's going to happen here. If, especially looking at the Turkish community, looking at the Afghan community, looking at the Chechen community in Austria, there's a potential for mobilization there if you want to. And that's a very concerning development, especially if we link it to Islamist narratives. And a very professional and flexible propaganda that creates online worlds in which you can completely turn away from society. We see this also in other parts of society, by the way. We don't only see it with the Muslim community. We see it also with the Christian community. We see it with people who are not necessarily religious at all. I've just come back from a little holiday trip to my parents' place in the south of Austria in Carinthia, and I talked to some youth friends and people I know from my childhood. And the majority of them says they don't really want to have anything to do with politics anymore. They want to have anything to do with what's going on in Vienna anymore, with political decision making. They're turning their back on it. As a group, you do what you want, we do our own thing. And that's, to a certain degree, what's happening in the Muslim community as well. NGOs and associations are a key driver of this. They use the strategic use of legal frameworks and lawfare. That's something we are very familiar with, especially Professor Aslan and the Documentation Center. We have gone through a lot with one of your projects that we funded. The immediate backlash was we were sued by one association in Austria, the Muslim Youth, which used to be somewhat allegedly affiliated with the Muslim Brotherhood. The current state is hard to say, hard to tell. However, the first action was to sue us and to reach out and try to press all the buttons. The good news is, though, that the Documentation Center, we are funded by the government, and we have the mandate to also be a bit more resilient when it comes to those approaches, especially to those approaches of lawfare against researchers, against academics, against critics. We observe influence on education, culture, and religious institutions, hipster Salafism, a modern lifestyle branding to attract especially young people. We did some workshops in schools, and we were asking the students and the pupils there about all those influencers that some of you may be familiar with. There's all those Salafist, Islamist influencers, Generation Islam, and so forth, Abu Bara, etc. All of them, all the students know them. They are on all of their phones. There was not a single one that was not aware of those influences. Another really problematic development here is if I was a young Muslim and perhaps my parents were not that religious or didn't really care much about it, and suddenly I'm interested in religion. I want to learn more about it. I want to learn more about Islam. Well, why not? I mean, might as well. And I go online, I go on YouTube, and I type in Islam. What's the first thing I find is Generation Islam. It's the most rigorous online preachers, the most rigorous activists that are out there. There is no moderate tone. You basically, your first exposure to your religion or a religion you're interested in is actually a rather extreme version of it. And at the end of the day, what those influencers do is the normalization of Islamist interpretations and narratives. They spread on Instagram, on TikTok, on YouTube, the same ideas of victimhood, of anti-Semitism, of anti-Westernism. We've heard about it, we've seen it, we've experienced it ourselves and researched it. And this is the modus operandi that they have chosen, leading to the polarization of society. And that's the real big problem here. It's like there is not a only an integration problem. It's not only a security problem. We have to look at society as a whole. We have to look at what these particular activities do to our society and how it has already separated us, how it has already created certain spheres that don't talk with each other anymore and are drifting further and further apart, much to the advantage of Islamist preachers, much to the advantage of the Muslim Brotherhood, much to the advantage to those activists that are actually trying to gain support just of that. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, really. It strengthens parallel structures and it impacts other forms of extremism. Daesh, Hanub, for example, is a left-wing, anti-imperialist, anti-Western, anti-colonial association in Vienna that overlapped quite significantly with suddenly with the Islamist narratives. And so those key trends are really the omnipresence of these virtual counter worlds, these digital activities, the polarization through those echo chambers, and the potential for further radicalization, of course. That's something that cannot be excluded because, for those who may feel that the sort of general Islamist narratives are not enough, they want to do more, they want to act more, they want to be more active, they want to participate more. Well, at some point, perhaps violence might be a solution. A very concerning thought. The exclusive interpretation gaining ground. So, Islamism has become the first point of contact, and the polarization and the differentiated debates marginalized. So criticism is termed immediately Islamophobia. I mean, we've been called everything, Islamophobe and racist and whatnot, especially my research institution. Interestingly enough, though, we have quite a few Muslims that apply to us and that work with us, that come from the community and actually see the problems in the community and approach us and say, look, we want to work with you because this can't go on in this direction anymore. Which basically brings me to the Documentation Center. The Documentation Center is a fund of the Republic and is financed by the Ministry of Integration, which has is located in the Chancellor's office. We have 16 employees from various research fields and academic backgrounds, and we basically conduct internal and external research projects. So our mandate is academic research, documentation, and information. The interesting thing is that we are funded by the government, and yet we are more or less autonomous. I say more or less because we have, for Professor Schröter is in our scientific advisory board, for example, but there's also more professors and researchers in there. So there's, of course, this advisory level. We have a supervisory board, an Aufsichtsrat, that basically checks our financial situation and how we spend our money. But that's kind of really it. And of course, we have the Rechnungshof, the state audit. Yes, we're audited by the state. However, the way we conduct our research, do our publications, we are non-political, and we have no interference in this regard, which is a great advantage because by now we started in a rather rough start. The idea came about in the FPÖ ÖVP government a few years ago that fell apart because of the Ibiza scandal, and then it was realized the project during the ÖVP Green government. So of course, immediately the assumption was also in the media, it's like, oh, this is a conservative political project. As like this is an ÖVP think tank, and what they're gonna do now is basically say what the politicians want to hear, or basically just justify what they're doing. We haven't done that, and we don't have the mandate. We don't do that. We have been very objective. We've been very neutral and established ourselves a reputation for being just that, studying ideologies, networks, and trends, as well as the structures and actors of political Islam. So, in this regard, we are somewhat of a preventive tool as well. We are an early warning system through continuous documentation and research. This is applicable for prevention work and police work, amongst other fields of government and prevention initiatives. We are part of the bundesweite Netzwerk for Extremismusprävention and De-Radicalization. So it's the Austrian network that deals with de-radicalization, as well as the EU Knowledge Hub and various other institutions on a European and Austrian level, providing them with scientifically grounded counter strategies. This strengthens democratic resilience, fact-based discourse against polarization. We need to counter facts with, we need to counter narratives with facts and reason, exposing and countering extremist narratives, basically calling them out. We've made the experience that the Muslim Brotherhood has worked, especially in Austria, and managed to establish itself really well because nobody has done anything for quite a long time. Nobody has shed light on what they were doing. If you pull them in the spotlight and have them justify their actions, have the people, for example, there's a good, very fitting anecdote. We do field research. We go to mosques. This is not comparable to a security service who might be there secretly or in a covert way. We go there very openly. So if we were asked by the imam, who are you, what are you doing here, what are you doing in this sermon, we'd be very open about it. We're from a documentation center. We don't have the mandate of a security service. We don't have any false identities and stuff like that. That's a completely different field. So we did that. We went to one of those mosques and we recorded one preacher that was very close to Hamas, glorifying Hamas and their great struggle against Israel, basically justifying terrorist acts. Ended up in one of our publications. And the result was that he had to issue a public apology. A lot of pressure was put on the imam. He had to actually justify himself. It was a very inconvenient, very uncomfortable situation for him, of course. I don't feel that sorry for him, given what he said. And at the same time, though, I mean, we haven't changed the guy. We haven't changed his mindset. I'm pretty sure we haven't. I mean, at night, in the evening, at the dinner table, he will probably say the same things. But we have definitely reduced the amplification level he had. And that's already something. It's not everything, but it's also not nothing. And that's I see this as a strength to actually shed light on this and to force them to publicly explain what they're doing. So we collaborate with EU partners, NGOs, government offices, etc. We have international research projects, some of which are with, one is with Chatham House, Counterterrorism Project, German universities, University of Vienna, Innsbruck, Münster, etc. And we contribute to the European prevention architecture through the Knowledge Hub and leading a panel there. Objectifying the debate, countering generalizations, and acting as a preventive safeguard in this regard. And with this, I want to thank you for your very kind attention. And if you have any question, please go ahead.